The story of the Levite's concubine in Judges 19:21 is one of the Bible's most harrowing tales, highlighting themes of moral decay and injustice. The account begins with a Levite man who lived in a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim. He had a concubine, a woman from Bethlehem in Judah, who left him and returned to her father's house. After she had been there 4 months, the Levite went to Bethlehem to persuade her to return. He took his servant and 2 donkeys. When they arrived, the woman's father welcomed him warmly and convinced him to stay for several days. The Levite ate and drank with the father and decided to leave on the 5th day, despite the father insisting they leave the next day since it was already late. When they were near Yebuz and the day was almost gone, the servant said to his master, "Come, let's stop at this city of the Jebusites and spend the night." His master replied, "No, we won't go into any city whose people are not Israelites. We will go on to Gibeah." So they went on, and the sun set as they neared Gibeah in Benjamin. They went and sat in the city square, but no one took them in for the night. Luckily, an old man from the hill country of Ephraim, coming from his work in the fields, agreed to accommodate them. While they were enjoying themselves eating and drinking, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house. Pounding on the door, they shouted to the old man who owned the house, "Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him." The owner of the house went outside and said to them, "No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing. Look, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out to you now, and you can use them and do to them whatever you wish. But as for this man, don't do such an outrageous thing." But the men would not listen to him. So the man took his concubine and sent her outside to them, and they raped her and abused her throughout the night. And at dawn, they let her go. At daybreak, the woman went back to the house where her master was staying, fell down at the door, and lay there until daylight. When her master got up in the morning and opened the door of the house and stepped out to continue on his way, there lay his concubine, fallen in the doorway of the house. He said to her, "Get up, let's go." But there was no answer. Then the man put her on his donkey and set out for home. When he reached home, he took a knife and cut up his concubine, limb by limb, into 12 parts, and sent them into all the tribes of Israel as a call to action against the atrocity. The tribes of Israel gather in outrage and demand justice from the Benjamites, who refuse to surrender the guilty men. This refusal escalates into the Benjamite War, with Israel waging a brutal battle against Benjamin. For 18 years, Israel had been struggling under the rule of King Eglon of Moab, a very fat man. This was no ordinary king. Eglon was ruthless, and his armies were powerful. The Israelites were oppressed and desperate for freedom. Every year, they had to pay heavy tributes to Eglon, giving him grain, livestock, and whatever else he demanded. And each year they grew weaker as their lands and resources were drained away. Then one day, Israel cried out for help, and God heard their plea by giving them a deliverer, Ehud. Ehud, son of Gera from the tribe of Benjamin, wasn't just any warrior. He was left-handed, which was unusual at the time. This unique trait would soon become his greatest weapon in a daring mission. God chose Ehud to be the judge who would deliver Israel from Eglon's rule. Ehud had a plan. He crafted a double-edged dagger about 1.5 feet long, small enough to conceal but sharp enough to make a fatal blow. Because he was left-handed, he strapped the dagger on his right thigh where no one would think to check. Ehud joined a group of Israelites who were heading to King Eglon's palace to deliver their annual tribute. It was a tense journey. Israel was weak, and Eglon's guards watched every move they made. But Ehud stayed calm, playing his role until the perfect moment arrived. Once they had delivered the tribute and the other Israelites had left, Ehud turned back. He confidently approached Eglon and said, "Your Majesty, I have a secret message for you." Curious and maybe a little prideful, Eglon sent his guards away, leaving him alone with Ehud. Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his palace and said, "I have a message from God for you." As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. Even the handle sank in after the blade, and his bowels discharged. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Then Ehud went out to the porch. He shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them. After he had gone, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked. They said he must be relieving himself in the inner room of the palace. They waited to the point of embarrassment, but when he did not open the doors of the room, they took a key and unlocked them. There they saw their lord fallen to the floor, dead. Ehud was already on his way back to Israel, and he didn't waste a moment. He blew a trumpet in the hills of Ephraim, rallying the Israelite troops and shouting, "Follow me! The Lord has given Moab into our hands." Filled with courage, the Israelites followed Ehud. They blocked the fords of the Jordan River, trapping the Moabites, and struck down about 10,000 of their soldiers. Moab was defeated, and Israel was finally free. Thanks to Ehud's bravery and God's guidance, Israel had peace for 80 years. The story of Ehud shows us that strength doesn't always come from physical power or being in a position of advantage. Sometimes it's about using what makes us unique, even if others see it as a weakness. Let Ehud's example encourage you to see strength in the unexpected and purpose in who you are. The story begins with Absalom's sister Tamar. She was beautiful and virtuous, but her life was shattered when their half-brother Amnon lusted after her. Consumed by his desires, Amnon deceived Tamar by pretending to be ill and tricked her into visiting his chamber. There he violated her, then cruelly cast her out in disgrace. Tamar, devastated and shamed, fled to Absalom, who took her into his home. Although enraged, Absalom kept his feelings hidden, biding his time for revenge. King David, upon hearing of the incident, was furious but failed to punish Amnon. This inaction only fueled Absalom's bitterness. 2 years passed, but Absalom's hatred for Amnon burned fiercely. He invited all of David's sons to a grand sheep-shearing festival. With meticulous planning, Absalom ordered his servants to strike Amnon down when he was drunk. They carried out the plan, and Amnon was murdered. In the aftermath, panic ensued among David's sons, and they fled. David was heartbroken, mourning both the loss of Amnon and the estrangement of Absalom, who escaped to his maternal grandfather in Geshur. For 3 years, Absalom lived in exile, yearning to return home while David longed for reconciliation. Eventually, Joab, David's loyal commander, orchestrated Absalom's return. Using a wise woman from Tekoa, Joab presented a parable to David, convincing him to bring Absalom back to Jerusalem. In the parable, the woman claimed to be a widow with 2 sons. She explained that one son killed the other during a quarrel, and now the rest of the family demanded that the surviving son be put to death as retribution. This would leave her without an heir, devastating her family and inheritance. The woman appealed to David for mercy on behalf of her surviving son, framing her plea as a parallel to David's situation with Absalom. When David expressed his willingness to protect the son in the story, the woman revealed that her parable was meant to prompt him to act similarly toward Absalom, who had been estranged but was still his son. David recognized Joab's influence behind the woman's story, but ultimately agreed to allow Absalom to return to Jerusalem, though their relationship remained strained. However, David imposed a condition. Absalom could return, but he was not allowed to see the king's face. For 2 years, Absalom lived in Jerusalem without seeing his father. Absalom became increasingly frustrated by David's refusal to grant him an audience, as it left his status unresolved. Despite living in Jerusalem, he was effectively cut off from royal privileges and influence. Absalom sought Joab's help to arrange a meeting with King David, but Joab ignored his repeated requests. To get Joab's attention, Absalom ordered his servants to set Joab's barley field on fire. This act of destruction forced Joab to confront Absalom. When Joab finally met Absalom, Absalom demanded to see the king, expressing his desire for resolution. If David still saw him as guilty, he was willing to accept punishment, even death. Joab relayed Absalom's message to David, who finally summoned Absalom. David forgave him. David kissed his son, seemingly mending the fractured relationship. But beneath the surface, resentment and ambition festered. Absalom, ever the charmer, began to conspire against his father. He stationed himself at the city gate, intercepting those who sought justice from King David. He would ask about their concerns and lament the lack of attention they were receiving from the king, saying, "Your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king to hear you." And Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land. Then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me, and I would see that they receive justice." Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice, and so he stole the hearts of the people of Israel and amassed a loyal following. After 4 years, Absalom made his move. He asked David for permission to go to Hebron under the guise of fulfilling a vow to God. Absalom told King David that he had made a vow to God while he was in Geshur, saying that if the Lord brought him back to Jerusalem, he would go to Hebron to fulfill the vow by offering sacrifices. David agreed, unaware of the rebellion brewing. In Hebron, Absalom declared himself king, and his followers rallied around him. News of the rebellion reached David, who fled Jerusalem with his loyal servants and household to avoid bloodshed. David's escape from Jerusalem was marked by sorrow and humiliation. Loyalists, including Zadok the priest, offered to bring the Ark of the Covenant, but David insisted it remain in the city, trusting God's will. Along the way, David encountered Shimei, a relative of Saul, who cursed and pelted him with stones. Despite the insult, David forbade retaliation, believing that Shimei's actions might be God's judgment. Meanwhile, Absalom entered Jerusalem and consolidated power. Advised by Ahithophel, a cunning counselor who was David's trusted counselor, who chose Absalom's side, Absalom sought to establish his authority. Ahithophel suggested publicly taking David's concubines, a move that symbolized Absalom's claim to the throne and humiliated his father. David, now in exile, organized his forces. Hushai, a loyal friend, infiltrated Absalom's court as a double agent. While Ahithophel advised a swift attack to crush David's weakened forces, Hushai counseled caution, playing on Absalom's vanity. Absalom followed Hushai's advice, giving David precious time to regroup. The armies of King David and Absalom clashed in the forest of Ephraim. David's forces, led by Joab and other commanders, gained the upper hand. Despite being vastly outnumbered, David's men inflicted heavy losses on Absalom's army, and the dense forest claimed even more lives. Before the battle, David had strictly instructed his commanders to deal gently with Absalom, saying, "For my sake, protect the young man Absalom." As Absalom fled the battlefield on a mule, his long, thick hair became entangled in the branches of a large oak tree. The mule kept running, leaving Absalom hanging in mid-air, vulnerable and helpless. One of David's soldiers spotted Absalom and reported it to Joab, David's commander. The soldier refused to harm Absalom, citing David's explicit order to protect him. However, Joab, angered and impatient, dismissed the king's command. Joab took 3 javelins and thrust them into Absalom's heart, while he was still hanging alive in the tree. Afterward, 10 of Joab's armor-bearers surrounded Absalom and struck him until he died. Joab blew the trumpet to signal the end of the battle, and his men stopped pursuing the fleeing Israelites. They took Absalom's body, threw it into a deep pit in the forest, and covered it with a large heap of stones. This unceremonious burial reflected the dishonor of his rebellion. When David received the news of Absalom's death, he was overcome with grief. He cried out, "Oh, my son Absalom! My son, Absalom! If only I had died instead of you! Oh, Absalom! My son, my son!" His intense mourning caused concern among his troops as they felt their victory was overshadowed by the king's sorrow. Joab, David's commander, became deeply concerned about the morale of the troops. The soldiers, who had fought bravely to secure victory against Absalom's rebellion, returned to the city feeling ashamed rather than celebrated. Joab confronted David, chastising him for putting his personal grief above the loyalty and sacrifices of his men. Joab rebuked David, saying, "Today you have humiliated all your men who have just saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead." Joab urged David to go out and encourage his troops, warning him that if he did not, his army might abandon him entirely. Realizing the truth in Joab's words, David set aside his grief and appeared before his men at the city gate, where he thanked them for their loyalty and efforts. Meanwhile, the people of Israel, who had supported Absalom, were left leaderless and uncertain about their future. The story takes place in the ancient lands of Israel during the prophetic ministry of Elisha, a man chosen by God to carry the mantle of Elijah. Elisha had recently witnessed the miraculous ascension of his mentor Elijah into heaven, a moment that solidified his role as God's prophet. Empowered by the Spirit of God, Elisha began his ministry with miracles and messages meant to guide Israel back to righteousness. After performing a series of miracles in Jericho, including purifying the city's water, Elisha set out on a journey to Bethel, a city known for its idol worship and spiritual rebellion under Jeroboam's rule. His path was not just a physical journey, but a symbolic one, a confrontation between God's truth and a nation straying from his ways. As Elisha approached the outskirts of Bethel, the sun cast long shadows on the dusty road. It was then that a group of youths emerged from the town, their laughter echoing like a mocking chorus. These were not mere toddlers. They were adolescents, old enough to know better, yet steeped in the irreverent culture of their community. Seeing Elisha, they began to jeer and taunt him. "Get out of here, Baldy," they said. "Get out of here, Baldy," they shouted, their voices dripping with contempt. Their words were more than a personal insult. They mocked Elisha's baldness, a physical trait likely tied to his role as a prophet. Even worse, they mocked the very miracle of Elijah's ascension, implying that Elisha should follow his predecessor into the heavens. Their ridicule was an affront not just to the man, but to the God who had called him. Elisha stopped and turned to face the crowd. His gaze was steady, piercing through the bravado of the youths. He stood as a representative of divine authority, and their mockery was a rejection of God himself. Enough! Elisha's voice was firm yet filled with sorrow, for he understood the weight of what was to come. The prophet pronounced a curse upon them in the name of the Lord. This was not a petty act of revenge, but a divine judgment meant to underscore the seriousness of their blasphemy. No sooner had the words left Elisha's lips than the air seemed to shift. The laughter of the youths turned to uneasy murmurs as a rustling sound came from the nearby thickets. Out of the shadows emerged two she-bears, their powerful forms moving with both grace and menace. The children's taunts gave way to screams as the bears charged. Chaos erupted as the animals tore through the crowd, wounding 42 of the youths. The survivors fled, their mockery replaced by terror and regret. Elisha continued his journey to Bethel, his heart heavy. He did not revel in the punishment of the youths, but understood its necessity. Their actions were not merely disrespectful, but emblematic of a broader spiritual decay within Israel. When word of the event spread, it served as a stark warning to the people. The incident was not just a tale of punishment, but a call to reverence. It reminded Israel that God was holy, his messengers were to be honored, and their words were not to be taken lightly. The story of Elisha and the children is a powerful narrative about respect, accountability, and the consequences of irreverence. It challenges us to consider how our actions align with divine expectations and serves as a reminder that mocking what is sacred has serious repercussions. Through Elisha's journey, we see not only the authority of God's prophets, but also his desire for his people to return to him in humility and faith. Until next time, be blessed and see you in the next story. David, a young shepherd who had already gained immense popularity after defeating the giant Goliath, became a central figure in Israel. His bravery and skill brought him into the service of King Saul, where he excelled as a warrior and leader. As he won victories for Israel, the people's love for David grew, and his fame began to overshadow that of Saul, leading the king to view him as a threat. One day, when the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs, and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. "They have credited David with tens of thousands," he thought, "but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom?" And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. Amid this, Saul's younger daughter, Michal, took notice of David. Unlike others who admired him for his military prowess, Michal's feelings were personal. She fell deeply in love with him. When Saul learned of Michal's love for David, he saw an opportunity to entrap his perceived rival. Saul reasoned, "I will give her to him, so that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." Saul's plan was twofold. First, to send David on a mission so dangerous that he might not survive, and second, to use the marriage as a tool to manipulate David. Initially, Saul offered his elder daughter, Merab, to David, but David humbly declined, saying, "Who am I, and what is my family or my clan in Israel, that I should become the king's son-in-law?" However, when the time came for Merab to marry, Saul gave her to another man called Adriel of Meholah. Then Saul ordered his servants, "Speak to David privately and say, 'Look, the king likes you, and his attendants all love you. Now become his son-in-law.'" They repeated these words to David. David, again humbled, protested, "Do you think it is a small matter to become the king's son-in-law? I'm only a poor man and little known." When Saul's servants told him what David had said, Saul replied, "Say to David, The king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies. Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. When the attendants told David these things, he was pleased to become the king's son-in-law. This gruesome bride price was designed to force David into battle, where Saul hoped he would meet his end. David, however, saw this challenge not as a trap, but as an honor. He accepted the terms and set out with his men to face the Philistines. With God's favor and his own unmatched skill, David triumphed in battle. Not only did he fulfill Saul's demand, but he exceeded it. David killed 200 Philistines, twice the required number, and presented the proof to Saul. This act demonstrated his extraordinary bravery, loyalty, and divine protection. Cornered by his own scheme, Saul reluctantly fulfilled his promise and gave Michal to David as his wife. Michal, who genuinely loved David, must have been overjoyed, but her father's intentions remained sinister. Instead of being grateful or content with the union, Saul's hatred for David only deepened. He saw that the Lord was with David in everything he did, and that Michal's love further cemented David's position in the kingdom. Fearing David's rising power, Saul became David's enemy, obsessively seeking to destroy him. Saul's animosity soon turned into open aggression. He ordered his men to watch David's house and kill him in the morning. Michal, now fully aware of her father's intentions, chose to side with her husband. She warned David of the danger, saying, "If you don't escape tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." Michal helped David flee by lowering him from a window, enabling him to escape Saul's grasp. To buy David more time, she placed an idol in his bed, covering it with goat's hair and clothing to make it look as though David was still there. When Saul's men came to capture David, Michal lied, claiming he was ill and unable to leave his bed. Her clever deception gave David the time he needed to escape into the wilderness. Then Saul sent the men back to see David and told them, "One, bring him up to me in his bed so that I may kill him." But when the men entered, there was the idol in the bed, and at the head was some goat's hair. Saul said to Michal, "Why did you deceive me like this and send my enemy away so that he escaped?" Michal told him, "He said to me, 'Let me get away. Why should I kill you?'" When David had fled and made his escape, he went to Samuel at Ramah and stayed there. This chapter of their love story underscores Michal's loyalty and courage, as well as God's divine protection over David. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.